Welcome, everybody. It is noon in New York. So that means, and it's Tuesday, so back for another Insiders event. Oh, hi, Raina. How are you? Raina just said she really enjoyed the book.
Thank you.
Um, uh, Raina, I hope you are well. I haven't seen you in a couple of months. Pete's coming to us from San Francisco. Pete, I'm still recovering from the Friday night pub crawl. I know you were there too. Hi, Jeffrey. 1 minute from the Soldier and Sailors Monument, a long walk to Grant's tomb. Um, yes, and the audio is on. Good, Jeffrey. Glad everything's working for you. We have a real treat for you today. We have Susie Orman Schnall with us, who is going to be talking about her awesome book, We Came Here to Shine, set during the 1939 World's Fair. I have been peeling through it. It is a really great read. Yes, the pub crawl was fun. And what's going to happen is Susie's going to talk to you about the book, about her process, give you an insider look to it. And then I'm going to jump in towards the end. We're going to do a little remnants of the amusement area, which is a big chunk of where the book takes place. And then we will do Q&A with Susie after that. I've already put a link at the top of the chat where you could purchase the book. Susie would like you to support small business. So the Astoria Bookshop in Queens does have the book available. You can order it from there. And there's also a direct link to her site as well. Robin, hello. How are you? Hi, Robin. It's so good to see you or see you on chat. It's nice. We've got a lot of good, solid insiders here, some of which I haven't seen in a very long time. Kathy asks, is this program being recorded for future viewing? Yes, it is. What happens is, just so everybody knows, all of the insider events are recorded, and then what we do is we cut them down because they start recording when we do our test run. So I've got to cut all that out, put in some graphics, adjust some sound, and then we post them on the archives page in perpetuity so you can enjoy them whenever. All right, all that being said, time for me to drop my screen and turn it over to Susie. Super excited. So Susie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Justin. I am so appreciative that you are having me here today. I have known about you guys and love what you do in New York. And I appreciate how you guys have pivoted so well during this time. And so I'm just really excited because this is what, we're all about, sharing these incredible sites with people of New York and people around the country and around the world to give a little behind the scenes view. So I will get right to it, and I am going to share my screen with you all because I have some really cool pictures that I would like to share. And so today we are going to be talking about We Came Here to Shine, which is my new novel that came out this past Tuesday, so a week ago today. And it's been a really fun week. So let's just start from the beginning. It is Sunday, April 30th, 1939, and it is opening day of the New York World's Fair, a day that men, women, and children from around the world have been anticipating since a committee was formed in June of 1935 to create a World's Fair in New York as a way to stimulate the economy. The fair committee had seen how World's Fair in other cities in the United States had been good for the economies, and they thought that this would be a great thing to bring to New York. And the site is Flushing Meadows, Corona, Queens. And as F. Scott Fitzgerald said in The Great Gatsby in 1925, he described the area as a valley of ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into the ridges and hills, and grotesque gardens bounded on one side by a small, foul river. So this was not an attractive site. A lot of clearing had to be done, but this is where the fair committee chose to develop these 1,216 acres. And in 1936 in June, a groundbreaking was held. And over the next 3 years, from 1936 till 1939, with an investment of $160 million, which is about $3 billion in today's money, the World's Fair of New York in 1939 was created. And as you can see, to orient you to this slide, straight there in the middle is the framing of the Trilon and the Perisphere. Just above it is the New York building, which is now the Queens Museum. To the left would have been the amusement zone over that bridge, which is still at Flushing Meadows, Corona. And and a lake was being formed off to the left there, Fountain Lake. And you can also see somewhat the framing if you look at the Trilon and the Perisphere and you direct your gaze till about 7 o'clock, you can see the framing of Constitution Mall coming down into what would be the Lagoon of Nations. So here's another shot of the framing of the Trilon and Perisphere, and here is what the World's Fair looked like. Now we're oriented the opposite way, just so that you're not confused. The Trilon and Perisphere again in the middle, but looking up through Constitution Mall to the government zone, and the New York building would be behind, underneath the Trilon and Perisphere. And this is what it looked like on opening day. This is the aerial, and here is FDR on opening day on April 30th, 1939. And this is how he declared the opening of a fair, which is the epigram in my book. The time has come for me to announce, with solemnity perhaps, but with great happiness, a fact. I hereby dedicate the World's Fair, the New York World's Fair of 1939, and I declare it open to all mankind. And there's a great video of that if you want to find that about the opening. And the opening coincided with the 150th inauguration of George Washington. And that was the date that they were aiming for to start. And it's in the setting that I create my book and place my story of We Came Here to Shine. And that's the cover. And I'm going to give you a quick summary of the book and tell you some of my inspiration and some of the research that I did, and then take you on a little bit of a tour of the World's Fair. So We Came Here to Shine is uplifting historical fiction set at the 1939 New York World's Fair, and it focuses on two ambitious women and the summer that they have at the fair. So this is the inspiration for Vivi. Vivi is my first main character, and she is a gorgeous Hollywood actress who is about, in the first chapter, to start her first starring role in Hollywood, when the studio head plucks her out of her film and sends her off to New York to star in the Aquacade as Aquabelle #1. And on the right there, those two photos, top and bottom, are Esther Williams, some of you may have recognized. And I'll talk more about Esther Williams in a minute. My second main character is Max, and Max is inspired much by Katharine Hepburn. Max was a plucky young journalism student at NYU who is given the opportunity to participate in this very esteemed internship program, and all she wants is to be placed at the New York Times for her summer. But instead, her professor places her at the World's Fair, where she is to work for Today at the Fair, which was the fair newspaper. And that is the last place that Max wants to be, because she wants to write hard news. But at the end of the day, we have these two characters, both striving to make their way in a world filled with men and filled with obstacles in their path. They eventually meet, and the story evolves from there. The fair itself is a third character, and I had a lot of fun bringing all of its color and excitement into my story. And this is an actual vintage postcard from 1939, photograph of it, of a postcard that I own. So how did I come up with the idea for this novel? People like to ask me, because I didn't grow up in New York, and I didn't really know anything about the World's Fair. Well, it all started with this book, The $1 Million Mermaid, which is Esther Williams' autobiography. I was reading The $1 Million Mermaid, and I got to the part where Esther Williams is 19 years old, working at a department store in Los Angeles, when she is asked to audition for Billy Rose to swim in his aquacade. And I was reading that, and I saw the word aquacade, and I thought, I don't know what that is. So I went on to Google and looked up aquacade, and here we have a photograph of the aquacade. So for those of you who don't know, the aquacade was a synchronized swimming spectacular. It was started in 1937 at the World's Fair in Cleveland, and it was a huge production, $1 million production put on by Billy Rose, who was a Broadway producer, an impresario of his time. So as you can see on the left, we have an audience section that sat 10,000 people, and they held 4 shows a day. So you can think about how popular this production was. In the center, there was a pool that could fit 100 swimmers doing their routines. And in the front and the back, there were stages. That pool was about 275 feet wide, the stage behind it. And then on either side, you could only see the one on the left, but on either side was a very tall diving tower that contained diving platforms, as well as room for an entire orchestra on one side and an entire glee club on the other. So this was a huge production. And when I started researching the applique to find out what that was, I got sucked into a rabbit hole, started researching the World's Fair itself, and really thought that that would make a really great premise for a novel. From the beginning, I knew that I wanted my main character, to be a swimmer at the applique. I thought that would be really fun to go behind the scenes of what the applique was really like, because Esther Williams in her autobiography talks a lot about kind of the behind the scenes, basically, what we didn't see, and everything from the hair and the makeup that the women had to do to some of the harassment that she experienced from the likes of Johnny Weissmuller, who was her co-star. So it was very, very interesting. And when I found out that there was an actual newspaper called Today at the Fair, and these are copies of 2 of the actual newspapers that I personally own. Let me grab those, that I bought on eBay. I was so excited because I knew that I wanted to have a second main character, and I wanted her to be a journalist because I had been doing some research on female journalists in the 1900s, and this just made there be a reason to have a female journalist as my second main character. And having a journalist as a character serves 2 purposes. One, it's a great way to illustrate what that life was like for a woman being a journalist in the 1900s, in the middle of the century. And 2, it allowed me to share articles and stories, an expository view of the fair in kind of a very natural way. So I did a lot of research, as you can probably imagine, to make sure that I was bringing the history of the World's Fair to life in an accurate way. I wanted people to be able to read this book and not wonder whether something was true. So this is a stack of books that I used, part of the books that I used. I definitely used more. These are some of the books I used. I also did a ton of research online through the internet, through magazine articles, through the Times Machine, which is the New York Times archive. I spent a ton of time on this website, which is 1939nyworldsfair.com. And maybe, Justin, you could put that in the chat, 1939nyworldsfair.com. It is an amazing website. It's so robust and so comprehensive, and I used it incessantly during my research, and I really, really love it. I also watched a lot of videos on YouTube. So on the left, some of you may know of the Philip Medicus collection. I think there are 17 reels, and it just shows people walking through the fair. And so I got to see what people wore and all of the different exhibits, and I got to watch actual tape of the applique and see some of the performances. And so if you're interested in that, it's the Medicus collection. You can see there on the screen, MEDICUS. And you can just scroll through those and start and stop, and it's really interesting. In addition, on the right is a screenshot from the Middleton family at the New York World's Fair. Some of you might know that the Westinghouse Company created what some call a propaganda movie. It was an hour long, maybe a little bit more. Yeah, just an hour long. And it showed a typical Midwestern family at the time attending the New York World's Fair. And so it put into context kind of what people would have been like, what their reaction would have been, and it showed a lot of sites at the fair, including many of Westinghouse's own exhibits. I also went onto eBay and bought a ton of souvenirs and memorabilia because I really thought that it would enhance my intimacy with the fair by actually holding some of these pieces of history in my hands and getting to interact with them in a way and getting to see. And when I bought these postcards, I don't even know if I realized ahead of time that some of them would have been filled out. And to read some of these postcards that people are sending to their cousins or saying, I'm at the fair and it's amazing. And they didn't use the word amazing, but that is the effect that it got. And it was really just such a cool thing to study. These are some of the costume jewelry, and on the left is a compact that I bought through eBay. And this is the official guidebook from the 1939 World's Fair. And you can see that it is in terrible condition, but it was really, here, I have it right here. It was really, you can see that the spine is cracked, and but it was really so great to read through it and hear from the fair organizers' perspective how they explained the fair. Again, I got the 2 original copies of Today at the Fair. Also on that 1939 nyworldsfair.com site, they have an archive of a bunch of Today at the Fair newspapers. So I was able to read through other issues and read the articles and see the listings of the typical events that would have been held every day. And I do replicate one article word for word that actually appeared in this newspaper, but I also write some other articles in the voice of Today at the Fair. So it was really helpful to get to read the actual articles so I could understand what type of voice was used. This is an original program from the Applicade that I have right here. And the centerfold is there, which shows Eleanor Holm, who was Aquabelle #1 in the 1939 World's Fair, and Johnny Weissmuller, who some of you may know, played Tarzan in the movies. He was the star of the 1939 Aquacade. Now, you might have remembered that I mentioned that he starred with Esther Williams in the Aquacade. That was 1940 at the Golden Gate Exposition in San Francisco. He was replaced in New York by Buster Crabbe. So this was and Eleanor Holm, just as a side note, she eventually married Billy Rose. So that's kind of interesting. And then the most popular souvenir at the fair was the Heinz pickle pin. And they used this as a promotional item for many, many years. But the one on the right, which is also at the center of that little circle, that's an original Heinz pickle pin, and the ones around it are reproductions. And hands down, my very favorite part of researching the fair was visiting the grounds. And this is Ken Frankel. I don't know if any of you have done a tour with him, but I arranged that through the through New York City Parks. And I got to tour the site, and it was so amazing to walk the paths. Obviously, as you know, nothing from 1939 is there except a couple little engravings. And there are still some remnants from 1964, including the big globe behind us, the Unisphere. But the pathways are all the same, and the footprint is all the same. And so to be able to walk across that footbridge on the left from where the Aquacade would have been, right there at Fountain Lake, all the way across the span of the fair to where the administration building would have been, where my character Max would have worked on Today at the Fair, was just really cool. And to walk in the paths that, you know, hundreds of thousands of people walked in to experience the World's Fairs in 39, 40 and 64, 65 really brought it all to life. I also went to the Queen's Museum, to the Visible Storage, and got to see their humongous collection of memorabilia. So I really tried to insert a lot of the color and the detail and that rich history into the story while not making it too expository and too boring. So as I said, the World's Fair covered 1,216 acres. And to put that into a little bit of perspective for you, the Magic Kingdom at Disney World is about 400 or 500 acres. So this is more than double what that is. It was enormous. It was not something that you could experience in one day for the most part and see everything. There were also many different transportation ways that you could get around. There were buses. American Express hosted something called the guide, they call it the guide cars. That wasn't the right word for it. Guide chairs. And there would be a good-looking, attractive young man in a pith helmet, and he would hold up a little vehicle, a two-wheel thing, and you would sit in it, and he'd push you in a guide chair, all branded by American Express. So it was tremendous, and it was divided, and this was unique for the time. The fair committee really wanted it to be navigable. So what they did was they divided the fair into 7 zones and the theme center. So let me run through those really quickly just to give you a sense of the history and to to orient you to how it worked. So the theme center was in the very center, and that consisted of the Trilon and the Perisphere, which were the architectural icons of the fair, much like the Eiffel Tower was the architectural icon of that Paris World's Fair. And so the Trilon itself, which was the tall triangular structure, that was, they say it's 700 feet high, but other research I did said that they stopped at 610 feet due to budgetary constraints and time constraints. And the Perisphere on the right was the big orb. And inside the Perisphere was Democracy, which was one of the most popular exhibits of the fair. And you can see the people on the top right on those ramps. Those were moving ramps, and it took them around, and they looked down over this model of the future, this model city of the future. And then the government zone was the top area. And the reason that it's colored is because the fair itself was color coded. The only thing that was white in the fair was the theme center, those 2 buildings. everything else took on a color, and it radiated from the center, a lighter hue, all the way out to the edge of that zone where the brightest buildings were held. And I wish I could see that in color, because I think that must have just been beautiful. And the flowers matched, and it was just a huge design effort that must have really been magnificent. So the government zone had pavilions for about 60 countries, and I've seen anywhere from 25 to 33 states. I'm not entirely sure. And you can see in the middle, that's the Italian pavilion. And these pavilions were huge. And inside would be exhibits about the country itself, what they wanted to show. There were restaurants. On the right is the French pavilion, and both the Italian and French pavilion I feature in my book. And on the left is the Lagoon of Nations, which was the central area of the government zone. And there was a fireworks and light show every night at 9 o'clock. The community interest zone was on the left, and one of the most interesting attractions of the community interest zone was the picture on the left here, which was the town of tomorrow. It had somewhere between 15 and 20 model homes, and you could go inside and see the town of tomorrow. And in each one, there would be rooms where you could see cross sections of all the building materials. The Gardens on Parade had about 50 different gardens. And on the right are the girls from Maison Coty, with a makeup company, had a big building, a big pavilion in the community interest zone. The food zone, on the left, we have the Heinz 57 building. These are just a few sample buildings that I just wanted to show you to get a sense. And that's where you could get your pickle pin. In the middle is the Borden exhibit. And Elsie the cow was very, very popular at the Borden exhibit, as well as the rotolactor, which is what you see there, which was meant to demonstrate automatic electric milking. And that was a big technological innovation at the fair. And on the right is the Wonder Bread, the Wonder Bakery pavilion, where you could see Hostess cakes and Wonder Bread being made. And you can see that the outside of the building mimics a Wonder Bread. Actually, it was continental baking. Is that what's called? Continental baking. Yeah. The outside mirrors the loaf, the Wonder Bread packaging. The communication zones on the bottom left was the home of our AT&T, RCA. It also housed the Turf Trilon Cafe, which you see on the left, which sat 1,000 people. It was a humongous restaurant and bar with double layer and a huge bar inside. And that's also features prominently in my book. In the middle there, you see the administration building, where I have my character Max work. And on the right is the Masterpiece of Arts building, which had, let me get this right, 500 paintings and sculptures worth $30 million from all over the world. It was a huge attraction. Now we have the production zone, and here some examples would have been Eastman Kodak, and on the left you can see they've made a smaller model of the Trilon and Perisphere, so you could come, they call this their photo garden. You could come and take photographs with the Trilon and Perisphere, and you can see the scale of them by the people sitting next to them. And then, as I said, Westinghouse had one of the biggest attractions, including this man. This is a 7-foot-tall robot called Electro Man, right? Electro the Moto Man, and he had a dog, and there was a show that he participated in, and he would light a cigarette, and that was a big attraction. And on the right, we have the Battle of the Century is what they called this at Westinghouse. This was a show that happened multiple times a day between Mrs. Drudge on the right and Mrs. Modern on the left, and this is when the dishwasher was introduced. And the MC in the middle would give each Mrs. Drudge and Mrs. Modern a big pile of dirty dishes, and it would be a contest who could finish their dishes first. So as you can see, Mrs. Modern would load the dishwasher, and then Mrs. Drudge, you'd see her washing all the dishes, and that was very entertaining. The automotive zone, the transportation zone was at the bottom there, and that contained what was another very, very popular exhibit, which was called Futurama, that GM did here on the left. Everybody got an individual chair, and it took you around to see another modern city. There was the Railroads on Parade show in the middle. And then Ford, is that Ford? I think it's Ford, did test driving. And you can see all the people lined up, and they would go around those ramps and test drive the cars. And then last but not least was the amusement zone. And this is where a lot of my book takes place, because it held the Aquacade. As you can see on the left, that's a postcard. And you can just see how humongous that structure was. It held the baby incubators where Dr. Cooney took care of preemie babies, and it held the 250-foot tall Lifesavers parachute jump, which is also featured in my book. Here's a picture of my desk on a typical day of writing. As you can see, I had always had, you can see the Today at the Fair newspaper on the left, some of the books I used, my dictionary on the right, all of my little sticky notes to myself, and the 1939 New York World's Fair research site up on top. So I'm not going to get into that map yet, but maybe I'll stop here and see if there are any questions about how I wrote the book, anything that you all want to know, and then I can get into some of the fun behind the scenes things with the writing and also the map that I feature at the beginning of the book. So Justin, do you want to see if there are any questions at this point?
Sure. If anybody has any questions for Susie at this point, you can just type them in the chat. Do you know if a woman worked on the fair's newspaper? Asks Raina Toby.
You know, it's interesting because I have the masthead, and there was a woman, but I think she was more the and I tried to find information about her. So the business manager was Thomas Gardner, but the editor was Catherine Maddrey, Maddrey. And I tried to find information about her and I could not, but I just thought that was also fascinating. So yes.
Cool, good question, Raina. Any other questions for Susie at this time?
And I'll add one more thing to that. At the time, it was very unusual. Women typically worked as foreign correspondents overseas. It was very rare that a woman would have written real news, hard news for a newspaper. They were relegated to the women's pages. And I use, just as a side note, I used this for my research. This was the Good Girls Revolt, which is Lynn Povich. And there's a spin-off television show from it. And this was based more in 1969, 1970, when the women of Newsweek sued their owners because they were researchers and they weren't allowed to write articles. And I also used this book called Women in American Journalism. So I did get a good sort of view on journalism at the time. And I was really fascinated with Nellie Bly, who some of you might know wrote However Many Days in a Madhouse and the Around the World. She went undercover. And my original story for this was an undercover journalist at the Applicade. But that's another story. So.
Cool. Yeah, and I noticed in the book, Max always has this sort of butting up against pushing her writing out there because basically the editor of the paper just thinks, well, do the timetables, do basic, the basic stuff, the calendar for the day, because women are, I forgot what he said, women are just better at that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I forgot what the exact quote was, but I was like, oh my God, this is so frustrating.
Yeah, and that is talking about the themes of the novel. That right. is the main theme is women and ambition and what it was like for women in 1939, especially young women who were very ambitious, who were expected to be wives and mothers. And obviously I like to show in my books kind of what has stayed the same and what has changed. My last book was called The Subway Girls, and it was about the Miss Subways contest, which is also a really fun slice of life of New York history. And that was set in 1949. But it's really just, what I find the most interesting to think about is how women were forced to be creative in terms of pursuing their dreams. And I kind of juxtapose Max, who was really ambitious and bold, and Vivi, who was a little shyer, and how they both wanted to be more than what the men around them were allowing them to be, and the society around them were allowing them to be. And in Vivi's case, kind of what she herself was allowing herself to be. So.
Yeah, it was a really great juxtaposition between the two of them. And of course, I just love that Max was a Scotch drinker, which again was a statement for women as well, considering, that she drank Scotch, she drank it neat. So I just love that. There's a little detail I love.
Yes, Vivi drank champagne because her studio head told her that proper young women did not drink anything of color. Right. only the champagne and wine. Everything, the whiskeys were off limits.
Giovanna said it's 10 Days in a Madhouse by Nellie Bly. Yes, which was
Giovanna.
which takes place on Roosevelt Island. Or
Yes, it's a fascinating, fascinating book.
really great, really great. And Nellie Bly's absolutely amazing. Um, uh, Janet says, thank you for the Miss Subway. Never knew that. Great info. Yeah, the Miss Subway phenomenon, really, really interesting. I think the Transit Museum did something a couple of years ago. They did yes, there it is. That's your first book.
Yeah, this is my third book, and I'll tell you something really quick about this, that the way I got the idea for this was I was listening to NPR one day, and a story came on about the Miss Subways contest. And the reason that it was on NPR was because a book had just come out, and I can grab it, but it's up there, a big coffee table book called Meet Miss Subways that a photographer and a journalist had done. And that was the Transit Museum exhibit that you were talking about. And it was really, really exciting. And so they got a lot of coverage. And that's how I heard about the Miss Subways contest. Actually met with the photographer who did that book. And she helped me get access to some of the Miss Subways winners who I feature in the book. And for those of you who don't know Miss Subways, it was a contest in the New York City subway system. It was like a beauty pageant for young women. So I'm looking for the pictures, but these were the ads in the subway. And if you go to the Transit Museum, you can go in the basement to where all the old subway cars are, and you can actually see some of the Miss Subways ads up there.
Yeah, it's super cool. Any other questions for Susie at this point? Oh, Marcy said, yes, one of the lead characters in the musical On the Town is a Miss Subway's winner.
That's right.
I forgot about that, Marcy.
Yes, she's called Miss Turnstiles in that film and play. Yep.
Cool.
Based on Miss Subways. So if there's no more questions, I'll tell you a little fun fact about the production of the book, which is that I really wanted to have a map at the beginning of the book, because I don't know about y'all, but when I'm reading a book like this that's set at a real location, that's large, and you have the characters going from one place to the next, I find that I personally like to be oriented in that location, and I really wanted to do the same for my readers. Now, all of the maps of the World's Fair, as you can imagine, and I'm just going to share my screen again to show you exactly what I'm talking about here. But all of the maps of the World's Fair look somewhat like this. And this is an original map from the New Yorker. It was an insert. And you can see there are hundreds of buildings, and the index that they have up at the top lists so many buildings and exhibits in very, very small type. And I knew that if I were tried to reproduce that into a small little spread of a paperback, that it would be impossible to read. So I realized that my only option there was to commission a custom map for the front of my book. And so I started doing research to try and find an illustrator, and I ended up finding this woman. Her name is Silvia Guerra. She lives in Milan. She's an illustrator, and I loved her maps. I thought they were really creative, and I ended up hiring her, and we went back and forth for a few months where I would send her maps of the World's Fair along with the buildings. We thought it would be, we could highlight 10 or some odd buildings that I feature most in the book and pull those out, and so people can see where, rather than showing 200 buildings, we would just show 10 buildings. And so we went back and forth, and she came up with the wayfinding. She was so creative and had such beautiful illustrations. This was all done online because she lives in Milan, but she did end up in New York over the summer. I guess this was 2 years ago. And so we did meet one day and kind of were able to work in person. But at the end of the day, this was the map that Silvia created. And as you can see, those black banners list the 10 or some odd locations that I wanted to highlight. And you can see on the far left, there's an illustration of Max at the administration building, which is where she worked. And on kind of to the middle, but just to the right of that gray line that traverses top to bottom, you can see Vivi at the Aquacade. And all the buildings highlighted are where they go in the novel. So you can see, when Vivi had to walk to meet Max at the administration building, how she would have had to walk. And that was what I was alluding to when I went to go visit the actual fairgrounds. Getting to walk those paths were really cool. And then this is the color version of that map. but it's featured in the book along with some other photographs from the World's Fair. And I will show you some of those right now. Let me stop the share. So you can see at the beginning of the book, here's that map. This is the novel. Here's that map. And then I have a picture of the Trilon and Perisphere, picture of today at the fair, which featured the King and Queen's visit, which I write about in the novel. That was a really big deal. The Applicate and a few more things. So there's a lot to look at. And also the website that Justin shared in the chat. On my website, I talk a lot about the history of the fair and give you links to some things that you might find interesting.
I am reposting that down in the bottom of the chat, Susie.
Okay.
Also, Cindy Burnett says, the map is a great addition to your book, and I agree. It's a beautiful map.
Thank you.
Awesome. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to take you on a brief 10-minute tour of the remnants of the amusement zone, which are featured in Susie's book, because I dragged Untapped photographer. Well, I didn't drag him because he's a Flushing native and he loved going home. But a couple of weeks ago, we went out to Flushing and took some pictures over on the amusement side, which if any of you have joined our tour, you know, we don't go over there. We go over to, you know, the fairgrounds by the Unisphere, and we do the Queen's Museum, and we do the Fountain of the Planets / the Lagoon of Nations. So this was a real treat for me because I really enjoy doing this. So this is an overhead shot of the amusement zone. And actually you can see in the distance where my cursor is, that is the USSR pavilion. That's Red Big Joe, or the Bronx Strap Hanger, as the New Yorkers called him. USSR pavilion was only allowed to stay for 1939, 1940, but this is over on the other side where, again, a good portion of Susie's novel takes place. And you could see the train tracks running over here. That's the train tracks to the IND World's Fair line, known as the Double G, which Susie does mention in the book, which I was so happy about. Max takes the IND out there on her first day of work. And this is a general perspective of what the area looks like today. I tried to replicate the shot as close as I could, although again, this is Aaron's photography, not me. I just pointed him. And basically what you can see is everything that remains from the World's Fair, save for 2 to 3 structures, is from 64 and 65. There's very little left from 39, but the amusement zone does have a 39 building, which we'll talk about in a second. Back to the Double G. So you could see, you would have taken, and I believe, Susie, correct me if I'm wrong, Max lived on the Upper West Side?
Yeah.
So she lived on the Upper West Side, so she would have taken what we would have known as something like the E today, on the IND line, 8th Avenue line, out to Queens, and then at Jamaica would have basically transferred to the Double G, which spun off the Jamaica Yards and through the fairgrounds past the amusement zone. And you can see this dot here is where the station is. Now, this is what the IND station looked like. It was always meant to be temporary, which was very odd because usually New York subways, they built everything to last permanently. This was the only case where any New York subway was constructed and destructed intentionally. And so it was run by the city-owned independent company, which was the third of the proprietary lines before they joined them all together. And this is a shot. They did a really nice job. This is a little bit of a warped shot of the platforms. It was very large. So you had a bunch of platforms. At first, it was the Horace Harding Avenue station, which then became the World's Fair line. And you can see where my cursor is on the far left. There is a cemetery over there. That cemetery is still there today. Horace Harding Boulevard cuts through behind me in this picture. Here is a shot of them constructing it. So what they did is they built these platforms, basically one of which was built over the Flushing Creek, and the Flushing Creek was used, as Susie had mentioned, when they had terraformed this park out of basically a gigantic ash dump. They had to use the Flushing Creek, which was running from the Flushing Bay, and dam it up to create Meadow Lake and Fountain Lake and the Lagoon of Nations. And so they also put the subway station over it. Now, I went digging around down there. So right now it's the nexus of three gigantic ramps onto the highway. You've got the Grand Central, you've got the LIE, you still have Horace Harding, but there are a couple of very faint remnants from the old station. This was a retaining wall, which was built to build one of the platforms over the creek. It's another shot there. It is super dirty down there. And this is where the station would have been. You can still see some of the lampposts that mark the paths. And on the other side of these ramps, there was a giant circular sort of, almost looked like a cul-de-sac, which would have been sort of the main entryway into that area, which was used in 39 and repurposed for 64, 65. It's still there today. This is part of that old sort of damming system, retaining wall that they had built to not only support the station itself, but also to keep the flow of the Flushing Meadow going so that they could keep the lakes and the Lagoon of Nations, later on the Fountain of the Planets for 64 and 65, viable. And here's just another shot, completely different from that day before all of the highways were put in. But one of the advantages of having the station at this location was you could get off the platform. It was a bridge that led you down onto the amusement side. And if you went left, you could go deeper into the amusement zone. And if you went right, you would go over the Empire State Bridge for 39 over into the main fairground area. And there's it. I'm sorry, I just threw that one in there. So if you walk around, all of the manhole covers are actually 1939 remnants. So that is the NYC Electric Company. So there's also NYCT, which is the precursor to New York Bell, which would have been featured in 64, 65. So that's a really neat kind of Art Deco remnant still left around in the ground. Now, this is another aerial view. It does not have the aquacade in it. The aquacade is a little further north in this picture and at the base of the lake, but you can see the parachute jump. And you can also see the World's Fair line tracks here that ran alongside, which is basically where the Van Wyck is today. It sort of follows the path of the Van Wyck. Now, this building is a 1939 remnant, which was left behind. It's one of, again, you've got the Queen's Museum, you've got this building, and you basically have those eagle sculptures on top of the flagpoles by the Fountain of the Planets, and that's it. This was the boathouse, and actually it still is a boathouse. It was left to rot after 64, 65. It was in really rough shape, and they went through a couple of restoration processes. In the 90s, they restored it, but not so great. But then in 2012, it got restored, and it houses Row New York, which is a boat club for girls, which is an awesome club, and also the Hong Kong Dragon Boat Festival, which lets the Flushing Chinese population come, I believe it's once or twice a year, to do a very large, very ornate boat festival using the boathouse. It's really cool. The boathouse, I know during the pandemic, was closed, although the day we went, which was 2 Mondays ago, where these pictures are from, they did reopen the bathrooms, which I was kind of shocked about. What you can see is they put new windows in. I think they repointed the bricks because the base looks good, but the roof is kind of in rough shape. But again, this is 1939. In Vivian Max's story, this would have been a boathouse as well. You could have rented boats to go on the lake there, and it would have been that building. Here's another shot. I love the weather vane and the clock on top, but again, those things are in really rough shape. And Aaron did there's a plane flying over. Aaron did a really good job of brightening it up. And you can see there's a boat shaped at the bottom, a boat-shaped planter there, which I kind of love. And as Susie mentioned, a part of the book does take place at one of my favorite structures in New York City, what was built for the Lifesaver Company, the Lifesaver Parachute Jump, 250 feet, as Susie had mentioned. After the World's Fair closed, the Tilleyou family from Coney Island bought it to install it in their Steeplechase Park in Coney Island. I think, if I remember correctly, and Susie, if you have better facts, let me know. The Lifesaver Company paid $15,000 for it, and then I believe they turned around and sold it for like $150,000 to the Tilleyoos. So they made a huge profit on it, as far as I know. But what I love about this picture is, and there's a really great color video of the parachute jump during the 39 World's Fair, all of the lifesavers crawling up the side of the parachute jump. I found this in the New York Public Library archives. a guy on one of the parachute swings hanging above the amusement zone right as they were installing the parachute jump.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's such a, I don't know if he's a clown. He's in pajamas. I'm not sure what's going on in the photo, but I was like, did this guy just wake up on the parachute jump? Like, what is it about? If anybody knows, let me know. I just found it in the New York Public Library archives years ago when I was doing research on the tour, and I loved this picture. And there is the corner of my head down in Coney Island, getting the parachute jump today. Again, it is the original structure. Marty Warkowitz, our former borough president here in Brooklyn, because I'm reporting from Brooklyn, calls it New York's Eiffel Tower. And now it has 8,000 LED lights on it, which shine different colors for different occasions. And in the summer, they shut it down for bird migration at 11 o'clock at night.
But they don't ever, when's the last time it functioned? Do you know?
The last time it functioned as the parachute jump was 1963, I want to say. Right before they closed Steeplechase, it was running. There was a temporary time a guy bought Steeplechase from the Tillious as they were waiting to demolish it. And I think he ran it a couple of times in the mid 60s, but it has not run since the 60s. No. It sounds like the scariest ride in the world because of the way it operated. You know, you have this, basically it was like this leather swing. Two people could sit in it. They bring you all the way up to the top. You have gorgeous views, but there really isn't much keeping you in place. And then of course they drop you, the parachutes deploy, and you sort of float down.
Yep.
So this is where the parachute jump was. So this is modern day. This fence actually is fencing in a model airplane field using the old footprint of the parachute jump. So you'll see here that cement sort of macadam with all the weeds cracking through it. That's where the parachute jump sat. And then it was repurposed as a sort of runway for model airplanes. You can see it again through the fencing right there. That's what it looks like today.
Someone just asked in the chat, Justin, Kathy asked, where's the video of the parachute jump that you were referring to?
So I have a link to it in my files, Kathy, but if you go to YouTube and Google Lifesaver parachute jump, it's one of the first things that comes up. It's in a really nice sepia color. And if I have time in between this and taking more questions, I'll try to find the link and put it in the chat. If not, Kathy, I can email you.
Do it right now.
Cool, thank you. So this is a photo. I recently just found this photo in preparing for this. I do not know who the guy is with the spatula in his hand for that pillar, but I do know that's Grover Whalen and Robert Moses behind him. And again, Grover Whalen, mentioned in Susie's book, was the president of the 1939 and 40 World's Fair. Robert Moses, who would go on to be president of the 64-65. Robert Moses, one of the sort of spearheads behind getting the World's Fair where it was. This is the dedication of the site of the Aquacade, which the Aquacade, as Susie pointed out, was actually the show that Billy Rose created and which followed him around the country. The building that it was in, which I continually call the Aquacade erroneously, was actually the New York amphitheater for the World's Fair. And you can see there's a bit of that right on the pillar there. This was the entrance into that amphitheater.
I've never seen this picture before.
Oh, I'll send it to you, Susie. It's great. It got a little cut off. There's a really great Art Deco statue, and I don't know why it didn't make it. It got cut off.
Oh my gosh. You know what? It's so cool. Sorry, guys. I'm like fangirling out here because like, it shows the massive, I've never seen this before.
Yeah, no, it's a really great photo. I will, after the talk, I'll send you the full one. It's a really stunning sculpture, which got cut off. About that. Now, there was a guy, which I found by the name of Carl Taps. And Carl Taps went and photographed the Aquacade. So the Aquacade, or the New York State Amphitheater, I'm doing it again, was left in the park after 40. And it was repurposed for 64 and 65. It wasn't as lavish a show as Billy Rose's show, but they were doing similar programming in the mid-1960s. And then they left it there. And the idea was, much like the New York State Pavilion on the other side of the bridge, they were going to use this as a concert venue because it makes perfect sense to use it as a concert venue. But it left to rot. like a lot of things during the 70s and 80s. It was in really rough shape, as you can see. This is a shot from up above, and you can see it was just left to sit there. And actually, Aaron's not here today because Aaron's away working on a project in Vermont. But Aaron, being a Flushing kid, growing up and hanging out in the park as a preteen in the 90s, remembers this structure before they tore it down, because they tore it down in 1996. So it sat there till 96, not doing anything, and activists really wanted to have it repurposed and again used as a concert venue for Queens. And the problem was there was a lot of asbestos that was used to build this. And they
Wasn't
decided,
it used as a public pool at one point, though?
I think right after 64,
Okay.
they tried to use it as a public pool. If there are any Queens natives who have a memory of using it as a public pool.
Yeah, well,
let me know.
Robin Roth wrote, she says, I remember this.
Okay. Thanks, Robin.
Yeah.
And if anybody remembers, there's been some conflicting data on whether or not it was open to the public or if people just kind of used it. I'm not sure. It looks like it's collecting drainage, but in this picture. And again, Carl Taps, I found this on a World's Fair, like sort of chat area. And look at these pictures of the, and it's heartbreaking, of the seats just rotting. And again, this was right before the demolition process. So these pictures would have been taken in 1995, even though they look a lot older. I think Carl, black and white them gives them a little bit more reference here.
Steve Tepperman went there with a day camp in the late 60s.
Oh, cool, Steve. That's awesome.
Wait, Steve, did you swim there or did you visit it? Like just the remnants of it? Oh, this is today. Okay. I see. Yeah. I went to that little snack bar.
So this is today.
He swam. Oh, that's so
okay, cool. So then it was being used in the 60s. I have heard that it was right after the 65, it was used as a public pool for a while. I think the abandonment came in the 70s.
Okay.
This is what the spot of the Aquacade looks like today. We actually took this on the other side of the lake to sort of get the perspective. You could see the New York State Pavilion, terrace on the park, which was the Port Authority Pavilion for 64 and 65. And this is the cafe today. Now, this doesn't look like much, but this thing was a treasure trove of remnants. And first of all, the name is great because it's the Ederle Terrace Cafe. And where the seats used to be for the amphitheater, they have put in paths that are called the Ederle Promenade. And who is Ederle? But Ederle was a New York native. Her name was Gertrude Ederle.
I have her picture right here.
And there she is. So she was the first woman to swim the English Channel. She was super cool. There she is. Susie's holding.
She was in the Aquacade.
And she was also in the Aquacade show, correct. I think somebody had said she was a Flushing native, but she was born in Manhattan. So I'm not sure if she had lived in Flushing for a while. She actually died a couple of years ago in her mid to late 90s in Wyckoff, New Jersey, which is near where my parents live. But the Ederle Terrace Cafe, named after her, which I think is super cool. And then you see these doors. So these doors are from the old amphitheater themselves, because the gates, when you walked into the amphitheater, had these great Art Deco-y, very exotic looking steel doors. There's a picture of one of them during the construction process. This is actually from the 30s when they were building the amphitheater. This, I know it looks like it might be demolition. It's not. It's not the exact doors, but this is something similar. And then here's my favorite. So these bas relief sculptures are from the front of the old structure. So you can see sort of the Art Deco style, that sort of ancient mythology illusion. And here it is. That's where it used to hang on the entryway into the old amphitheater. And then you've got another one on the other side. He was pumping that day we went because he was trying to get people to come over. I think it was one of the first days he had reopened for the pandemic. He had a big speaker out booming Z100. And this is the other bas relief. And there it is on the other side. So they flanked the two sides of the main entrance of the amphitheater. And then I just ended with this shot. It's a nighttime shot of the fireworks, which I know are mentioned in the book, from the amusement zone from 1939, just to give you a feeling of what it would have been like at night in the amusement zone. On the far, far end of the amusement zone, you can see the lake. And that's just my little spiel. I had so much fun with this,
So
going
cool.
back and getting to the other side of the park. So
I just want to share one little bit of history too. And if people have questions,
yeah,
definitely type them in. But so for people who don't know a lot about the World's Fair, so the fair was only meant to be for the summer of 1939, from April to October of 1939. And they were anticipating 50 million visitors. And they fell far short of that and only ended up with 25 million visitors for the summer of 1939, and got a lot of pressure from the concessionaires to reopen for the summer of 1940 to make some of their investment back. And the fair looked very different in 1940. Not only, I mean, if you think about where we were politically with the war, the USSR, I had heard that they tore down their structure after 1939, that they didn't show up in 1940. I do know that the largest world power that did not even build a pavilion in 39 was Germany. And then countries like Czechoslovakia and Poland didn't come back for the 40 fair. But also they rebranded the entire amusement zone and called it the Great White Way. And it was a little bit less upscale, I think. I think they made it more of a midway. And so I wondered, that picture that you had that had the big roller coaster,
mm-hmm.
I don't know if I never saw anything that there was a roller coaster in 39. I wonder if that was built for 1940. I'll have to find out. But anyway, they reopened the fair in 1940 from around April through October, and they made it had another 18,000 visitors. So it definitely fell short. And all of the buildings were taken down after 1940. They were only built to be there for that 1 or 2 years, except, as you said, for the New York building that is now the Queens Museum. But that's just a little bit more interesting history about it.
Yeah, they were trying to appeal, just because World War II, sorry, was beginning to amp up. They wanted to sort of create more of an Americana. My understanding was an Americana feel for 40,
Yep.
Which is why USSR left, and they turned it into the Federal Plaza, I think it was, which became sort of
I'm not sure.
more like almost like a Boston colonial scene,
Hmm.
on the spot of where this massive and very impressive USSR pavilion had sat, which if you had joined the other talk, you remember I told you they put a scale model of a Moscow metro station in that pavilion. It's insane what they did, and only to have it for a year. But yeah, and the same story repeats for 64 and 65, massively unattended. And of course, Robert Moses is telling everybody how great everything's going, which I liked. Was also a section in the beginning of your book, Susie, about how Grover Whalen was telling them to say everything's going great, and of
Yes.
course it wasn't going great. Same thing happened for 64 and 65, and Moses was basically telling everybody, yeah, oh no, we can't keep the people out, they're just coming in, and it wasn't the case, which is why the park was in the condition that it was in between 40 and 64, and then even worse condition from 65 until the 90s, until the Parks Department came in and did a lot of renovations on the remaining structures.
And now what's the status of the renovation of the, I don't know anything about the 64, 65, but the building that
New
they're
York
trying
State. So $14 million for the New York State Pavilion has gone to electrifying and lighting the structure. So what's going to happen is because it's dark at night, if you drive by, you see, the Unisphere is very well lit, the Queens Museum is very well lit, and there's this big hunking dark mass on the highway where the pavilion is, and they're going to light that. So the towers will be lit, and the Tent of Tomorrow will be lit, and that's sort of the beginning of what people are hoping is a greater awareness and restoration of the fair.
to.
So any questions? So we're getting great presentations. Susie, we make a great team. We
I
should
know, we
do
should
this
take
more
this.
often. Thank
Yeah.
you for picking up on the questions while I was doing it. Was very natural. Thank you.
Yeah.
Pete Tannen says great talk. And thank you, Raina. Raina, good to see you. Raina, I think I first met you on the World's Fair tour, if I'm correct. I'm not sure. or maybe
So,
not. He was
so
15.
Justin, for all of those listening, when the world gets back to normal, how often do you guys do a physical walkthrough of Flushing Meadows?
So yes, we do. Thank you for mentioning that. We do once a month from April to December. We do a World's Fair tour over there. Usually it's the second weekend of the month. What I would like to do is when we get back into the world, which should be soon, Susie, I think we should do an in-person walk with you and go around and look at the aquacade and some of the areas. We don't have to go in some of the deep areas that I went, but it could be fun as a sort of like book addendum. Maybe you could do some signing and that would be fun.
I would
It'd be a
love
great
it.
event.
I'm available. I have zero plans.
Okay, cool. So we'll let you know when we're getting back. The nice thing about Flushing is it's nice and open. You can socially distance, so we can do tours there sooner rather than later.
Robin says that is where you guys met in person.
That's right, Robin. I met a lot of great people on our World's Fair tours over the years that we are still in good contact with. Raina, Robin being one of them. Marcy, I believe I first met you on the World's Fair too, Marcy, right?
So what do you think it is about the World's Fair, Justin, that people are so fascinated by it?
I think, yes, good. I thought so, Marcy. I think it's people feel like they were part of that history because a lot of people were part of the 64, 65 World's Fair and they want to go and sort of relive the memory of it. I think because the park is there and there are remnants of it, it's something that people can associate themselves with. And I think, people have really great nostalgia for large events like the World's Fairs. Like the World's Fairs were these unifying moments. They were fun for kids. They were fascinating for parents. I think it's why people love going to Disney World. They love to go and have fun and be awed at the spectacle of it. Robert Morbeck says, 64, 65 was a defining moment of his life.
Wow.
No, it's not sad. But, I think that you say it so well in the book as well. I forgot if it was Max was talking to, I think her friend James when, she said she kind of didn't want to be impressed by it, but she was impressed by it.
Yeah.
Just the grandeur of it. And, it's humanity at its best at that moment, even when it's not. So I think that's why people love it and love World's Fairs.
So many people have reached out to me and said that their grandparents, one person said both sets of grandparents were on their honeymoon at the 39 fair. And my cousin even said to me, my parents and your parents went to the 64 fair together. And I called my mom and I was like, you never told me you went to the 64, 65 fair. She's like, yeah, I went with those. So it's like people have this in their history or they lived it themselves, which is so cool.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's really awesome. My grandmother was at both. She was 12 at the first.
Really?
And then she brought my dad and my aunt to the 64, 65. And as I think I talked to you about this on a call, she has better memories of the 39 World's Fair than she does of the 64 World's Fair. I think she just felt like that was such an impressive showing, the 39 especially because of what they did.
I'm going to add one more link into the chats. This is the link to let me add a www so it creates a hyperlink. But if you're interested in this sort of stuff, I have a lot more events coming up, including tonight I'm doing an event. Oh yeah, and there's Galena. So Galena is from the Harrison Public Library. She just posted. She says, great presentation. If you're interested in virtual trivia night based in 1939. So the Harrison Library in Harrison, New York, which is where I live, they chose this book as their summer reading program book choice. And so they're doing an entire summer of events based on the book, the World's Fair, 1939. They're doing an event with, I'm blanking on his name. Galena, what is his name? Who wrote the Richard Sandomir, sorry. He wrote The Pride of the Yankees, all about Gary Cooper playing the role of Lou Gehrig and his retirement from the Yankees in 1939. So there's a lot of different events. And I'm doing one tonight along with the author, her name is Elise Hooper. She's the author of Fast Girls, which talks about the 1936 Olympic team in Berlin. And so there's a lot of parallels because there was supposed to be a World's Fair this summer in Dubai Expo, starting in October, which has as of now been delayed till next year. There's a lot more we can talk about that, but also, as you know, the Olympics were delayed. So she and I are both coming out with our books during World's Fair year and Olympics year, and so it's interesting to. So we're doing that tonight, and a lot of other events if anybody's interested. There's Richard Sandomir, June 27th, virtual talk with Harrison Public Library. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, cool. And I think, you know, for the pandemic, it's great that we can still do all of these events virtually. And I think that it's just as good to have these talks. And I'm seeing, and I'm thinking, and Susie, maybe you could sound off on this with me as well. We have so many people who have so many memories of the World's Fairs with all the ephemera and pictures and stories of parents. I am going to talk to Untapped. Maybe we should do sort of like a roundtable, let everybody sort of have the opportunity to share a screen, show some photos, show some artifacts that they have either from their parents or from their own experiences. Because when we do these World Fair programs, everybody has a story. And I think let me stop talking about it and let other people talk about it. And we can sort of jury, and maybe Susie, if you want to join me, we could do it together and sort of.
I would love it. Like an open mic sort of thing. So we can hear from Robert about the defining moment of his life.
Exactly. Hear about the defining moment, some funny stories. My parents have a bunch of funny stories.
And Lori's aunt, who's 97 years old. Like, so let's do that. Let's have like an open mic night, and people can sign up, and we give them 5-minute slots, and then we can just
I love it.
Have some whiskey or champagne. Yeah. All right.
Who's in? So we'll put it on the calendar for August, because our July calendar is filling up. So maybe early August, we will have a World's Fair roundtable open mic night.
Like
I love it.
Like a weeknight, maybe.
Yeah. All
right, Peter's in.
Peter's in. Thank you, Peter. I think we'll get a lot of people in.
Maybe we'll have a new highlight of your. Oh no, that's Robert who is.
No, Robert will come. Robert, I want to hear what the highlights are.
Peter, do you have a daughter named Sloan from LA? See if Peter's daughter is Sloan. Anyway, okay.
Well, all right. Well, thank you, Susie, very much. Everybody, again, Astoria Bookshop. If you'd like to purchase the book online, it will be in major booksellers as well, or Susie's website. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you so much, Susie. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll see you in August then.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you guys. By the way, tomorrow is Secrets of the Financial District with yours truly, virtual talk. Thursday, no programming. Friday, we are welcoming Karen Carbiner back to do a Walt Whitman walk in Manhattan, a pride walk, which talks about Stonewall and FAFSA and all the other great stuff. On Saturday, on Friday morning at 11. That will start at 11, not at noon. See you guys then. Thank you, everybody. As usual, stay safe. Susie, good luck with everything, and I'll see you in August. Have a good day, guys. Bye.
Everybody, thank you.
Yes, Joy, it will be able to view after. It will be in the archives in about 2-ish days. Takes me time to edit it, but it'll be up there. Thanks, Joy. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Bye, Robert.